Hi, Sonia. I'm not hearing you yet.
It helps if I unmute my mic.
Yes. Okay.
So good, we can hear each other. You'll notice an additional name, Randy Wagner.
Okay.
I made him co-host, and he's going to be taking attendance as people come in. He'll check them off the list to make sure they were registered.
Okay. Great. Good. All right.
Let me make you co-host.
Okay.
That way you can do your slides. I'm thinking that it might be a good idea for you to just test your slide, make sure it comes up and I can see it.
Yep. Yep. They've got a new thing on here. That's strange. Okay.
Okay, it looks good so far.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, looks great.
All right.
And for your purposes, I don't know if you'd like to see the people on the side, but there's like this little slider bar in between
Yeah.
the images and your presentation that you can move in one direction or the other.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Usually I
I'm
keep
sorry.
that up. Yeah. Usually I keep that open.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. That's interesting. Okay.
Okay.
Let me see. Is there any, and I've tested on my end already.
Okay.
So I can bring up your slide if something goes wrong on your end.
Okay. Great.
And we've got a few people in the waiting room, like one extra. Evangeline must have dropped out. I usually wait, if that's okay with you, till we have like, I don't know, at least a critical mass before we let them all in.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it was breaking up a bit. I'm gonna connect in. Actually, it looks like it's a strong connection. Yeah, you can let them in now, or you can wait until 10 o'clock. Either one's fine with me.
I'll wait until 10
Oh,
o'clock, until
okay.
closer, or yeah, 8 o'clock here in Los Angeles.
Okay. Am I coming in clearly? Is my voice clear?
You're cleared. Do you want to stop the share so I can see you and make sure yeah, there you are.
You're really clear to me also, Mark.
Okay. Okay. I was just checking because Sonia's a little bit broken up occasionally for me.
Does this sound better?
No, there's a lag. Uh, there's a little bit of a lag, but that may be on my end. I don't know. As long as I'm
Randy?
as long as I'm
Randy, can you hear me okay, or is there a lag?
No, there's no lag at all
okay.
between you and I. We're in different rooms, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Great.
Okay. And I'll be careful that I'm speaking directly into the mic. Sometimes I turn to the side, and that could be the cause as well.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just shut down my mic and camera for 10 minutes and come back then.
All right, sounds good. All right, see you in a bit.
Okay.
Bye. So, Randy, can you
Yes,
hear me?
yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so you can tell we've already got the recording going. I'll edit that out.
Yes,
I still sound okay, right?
you sound great.
Okay, so hopefully other people can join. Can hear me okay.
Evangeline did email just a minute ago to the list asking for the link. So I just went ahead and sent her the link directly.
Okay, I also talked with her just a few moments ago, so
Mm-hmm.
she might And she said she was also not feeling well, so she
Ah,
might be a
okay.
little fuzzy. There she is. Oh, good.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good. All right.
So Randy,
Yes.
I don't know if you heard Mark, but he's okay with us waiting to let people in. He's also okay if you let them in one at a time, whatever is easier for you for checking people in.
Okay.
And
I'm already checking off the three that are there.
okay, and
You
I'm
know,
going to send you Evangeline's, hold on a second. Zoom coordinator, that's you. Okay. And I'm going to send you Evangeline's telephone number
okay.
just in case, because she's, she's not terribly technical and she hasn't been feeling well, so she might need some help.
Okay. Can you just set, there we are. Great. Okay.
Yeah. And her name,
I got it.
okay. You might even, if you're able to, want to give her a call so that she has your direct number.
Okay.
And in case she needs a little bit of assist.
Okay. I'll send everybody a message in there. Drew Harkey. Oh, there he is. It's Faith Harkey. Okay.
Probably using a family member's Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna put you on mute. I need to make sure everybody's on mute.
Looks like we lost Mark.
Randy?
Yeah, I just admitted Mark back
Okay.
in.
Can you see my email?
I'm not looking. I'm focusing on this. Sorry.
Okay. People are trying to get in. They're asking for the link.
Okay. I'm sorry. What would you like me to do?
Well, I just emailed them all, but yeah, I'll have to, let me just keep my phone on so that I can see if there are any new people. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, I'm just ticking everybody off. There's only one unknown so far.
Which is,
RW.
oh, yeah, and we can just let them in, and what you do normally is just text them and see what their name is.
Do you want me to Vicky Joe twice?
Yeah, and if you open up my email, I just sent the link to 3 people.
Okay, all righty. You want me to let people in now, sweetie?
Um, yeah, Mark, is it okay if we let people in?
Sure.
We have 25 people in the waiting room, and there are about 52 that signed up, including your
Okay.
guests. And then I just got 3 extras,
Okay.
so somewhere in that realm.
Okay.
Go
All right,
ahead.
I'll let them
Okay.
in right now, okay?
Okay.
Uh,
We have to do something about that IAJS logo.
I know, I just grabbed it.
Mark, do you mind if we wait just about a minute or 2 more? Because we're still seeing more people come in. Okay, so it looks like it's we don't have that many people coming in. Mark, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And for everyone here, good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our IAJS seminar series. Today's talk is Engaging the Emotional Self, Affect, Metaphor, and Embodiment in Analysis with Mark Winborn. My name is Sonia, and I'll be your Zoom host. Before we get started, though, just a few logistics. Zoom's going to be muted while Mark is speaking. And if you have a question, please use the raise hand function and I'll call on you. You can also ask questions along the way, and there is going to be a Q&A time after the talk. Also, feel free to privately chat me if you need anything. And with that out of the way, let me introduce Mark. He's a Jungian psychoanalyst and clinical psychologist. He's a training analyst with the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts and the C.G. Jung Institute of Küsnacht. His primary areas of interest are analytic technique and the integration of psychoanalytic theories. He's published or edited 5 books: Deep Blues, Human Soundscapes for the Archetypal Journey, Shared Realities, The Participation Mystique and Beyond, Interpretation in Jungian Analysis, Art and Technique, Beyond Persona on Individuation and Beginnings with Jungian Analysts, and Jungian Psychoanalysis, A Contemporary Introduction, as well as numerous articles and book chapters. He received the Gradiva Prize from the National Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis for the best article published in 2022 and was a finalist in 2014 for the best edited book in psychoanalysis. Additionally, he's presented papers in the past 5 congresses of this International Association for Analytical Psychology and is on the IAAP committee for the 2025 Congress in Zurich. He lectures widely, both in the USA and internationally. And with that, Mark, I'll hand off to you. Did we lose him?
Yes, Sonia, his camera looked like it was frozen. He may be trying to come back in.
Yeah, he's having some connection problems. Well, he missed his own introduction. Benny, I'm going to make you co-host if you don't mind, just in case we need some help.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, he's calling. Hold on. All right, he's joining. Or he was.
Yeah, I admitted him, Sonia, but I don't see him. Yes.
Yeah.
It's on the second screen. His camera's coming on now.
Okay, I'll make him co-host.
There he is.
Okay. Sorry about that. Had to switch computers. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's get started. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us on this Easter Sunday, if you're an observer of that holiday. And thank you for Sonia for taking the time to moderate this presentation. And I'll just jump in and share my screen here. All right. So this presentation is one I gave in Zurich at the Emotions Conference, the 75th anniversary conference, I Feel, Therefore I Am. And this presentation focuses on affect as the most fundamental layer of human experience and the impact of that layer on the analytic process. In Jungian analysis, there's typically a significant focus on archetype, image, and symbol as primary influences on the analytic process. However, without the engagement of an affective response to these influences, the analytic process can remain dry, abstract, and untransformative. This paper reviews research on primary affects, neuroscience, embodiment, metaphor, and cognitive science,
which serve to expand the traditional Jungian perspective by providing a broader view of how the affects, somatic experience, and metaphor interact with the more routinely referenced concepts of archetype, image, and symbol to shape the experience of the human psyche. This paper is one that was attached to the original invitation, I believe, by Sonia, and I'm sure you can contact her if you don't have this didn't download this paper, or you can contact me directly and I can send the paper to you. But it's really, I think, a very important paper in our literature. In 2017, neurological researchers Antonio Alcaro, Stefano Carta, who's also a Jungian analyst, and Jaak Panskeep published a groundbreaking article titled The Affective Core of the Self, a Neuro-Archetypal Perspective on the Foundations of Human Subjectivity. The article makes a direct link between neurological structures, affects, and Jung's concept of the self. So I won't go into the whole paper, I'll just go into their conclusions briefly. Based on their review of available research, the authors assert that the subcortical midline structures of the brain, the area referred to as the limbic system, are intrinsically related to the emergence of primary affective states that not only influence our behavior, but alter our conscious field, giving rise to specific feelings or moods, quote, which constitute the first form of self-orientation in the world. Moreover, such affective dynamics play a central role in the organization of individual personality and the evolution of all other more sophisticated psychological functions. I'm not sure, since I was offline for a moment, I'm not sure if Sonia mentioned that you can ask questions at any time during the presentation, and then we'll also have a dedicated Q&A time at the end of the presentation. Okay. The authors refer to this as the neuro-evolutionary layer of the human mind, which gives rise to the affective core of the self. They indicate that affects may be viewed as the basic organizers of the self, and propose that this primordial instinctive affective self precedes and is necessary for the development of reflective self-consciousness. Even at this fundamental instinctive affective level, the self interacts evaluatively and intentionally with the surrounding material world. The limbic system is also where the subcortical structures, that is, the areas of the brain below the cortex, meet and interact with the cerebral cortex. The structures of the limbic system, especially the amygdala, hippocampus, and thalamus, are involved in motivation, emotional processing, monitoring of internal bodily states, learning, and memory. The limbic system is the gateway through which our core affects, somatic experience, and environmental perceptions flow up to the cerebral cortex to form mental representations. For example, dreams, memories, complexes, and images. It's also the pathway by which our core affects interface with the body, being transformed into physiological responses and patterns of behavior. This flow of experience is depicted in the illustration by the blue areas. In both human and animals, where there is significant damage to the limbic system, all psychic activity collapses and the organism becomes zombie-like, entering a coma or exhibiting a largely vegetative experience without observable intentionality. The amygdala in particular forms the core neural system for processing fearful and threatening stimuli, including detection of threat and activation of appropriate fear-related behaviors in response to threatening or dangerous stimuli, what we commonly refer to as the fight or flight response. So what are the primary affects that Alcaro, Carta, and Panskeep refer to? There's been a great deal of research demonstrating that there are fundamental emotions which all humans share across cultures, as well as being the emotions that all other complex emotional states are built upon. One of the significant early researchers into primary affects was Sylvan Tompkins, who classified them into three large groupings: the positive emotions of enjoyment, joy, interest, and excitement, what he termed a neutral response, surprise or startle, and then the negative responses: anger, rage, disgust, dismell, which he classified as repulsion by smell, distress and anguish, fear, terror, and shame, humiliation. Later, Jaak Panskeep, one of the authors of the article I referred to earlier, provided support for the existence of 7 primary process emotional systems: seeking expectancy, rage, anger, fear, anxiety, lust, sexuality, care, nurturance, grief, panic, and separation, and play and joy, all activated via the subcortical regions of all mammalian brains. Panskeep's work led him to conclude that basic emotion emerges not from the cerebral cortex associated with complex thought in humans, but from deep ancient brain structures, including the amygdala and hypothalamus. There is a growing body of research indicating that many evaluations are made, decisions generated, and actions taken on a pre-cortical level, not just held out of conscious awareness, but literally taking place without the activation of the cerebral cortex of the brain and without involvement of our internal mental representations. Lewis Stewart, a Jungian analyst summarizing the importance of affective research for analytic work, indicates the affects are the lifeblood of the psyche. The affects are the bridge between body and psyche, instinct and spirit. These primal affects have universal forms of facial expression and bodily innervations. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has arrived at a similar position through his research. He says primordial feelings occur spontaneously and continuously whenever one is awake. They provide direct experience of one's own living body, wordless, unadorned, and connected to nothing but sheer existence. These primordial feelings reflect the current state of the body along varied dimensions, for example, along the scale that ranges from pleasure to pain. And they originate at the level of the brainstem rather than the cerebral cortex. All feelings of emotion are complex musical variations on primordial feelings. Now, if you're wondering whether this neuroaffective focus takes us too far away from Jung foreshadowed these developments in his writing, but didn't have the research methods available to explore his hypotheses. In 1937, Jung wrote, "If we look upon the appearance of the psyche as a relatively recent event in evolutionary history, and assume that the psychic function is a phenomenon accompanying a nervous system, which in some way or another has become centralized, then it would be difficult to believe that the instincts were originally psychic in nature. And since the connection of the psyche with the brain is a more probable conjecture than the psychic nature of life in general, I regard the characteristic compulsiveness of the instinct as an ectopsychic factor. Nonetheless, it is psychologically important because it leads to the formation of structures or patterns which may be regarded as determinants of the human behavior." By ectopsychic factor, Jung meant that the psychic characteristic of an instinct is an emergent quality of an originally non-psychic, compulsive, automatic urge or pattern that served to activate the organism, whether human, animal, or insect. This urge or pattern is considered by Jung to be fully ectopsychic because it originates not just outside the organism, but outside the psyche at a wholly physiological level. The ectopsychic urge or pattern is modified by the nervous system, and so modified becomes made psychoid. That is, it comes to reflect the interaction between the ectopsychic stimulus and the inner nervous system that processes it. Hence, in Jung's model, these ectopsychic elements become psychoidal in nature, having elements of both inner and outer life, mind and body, spirit and matter. René Descartes introduced the philosophy of mind-body dualism in 1637. An underlying tenet of mind-body dualism is that thought and reason are the preferred modes of experience, stemming from Descartes' oft-quoted phrase, "I think, therefore I am," cogito ergo sum. Mind-body dualism is the view in the philosophy of mind that mental phenomena are non-physical, or that the mind and body are distinct and separable. Descartes' philosophy became the dominant philosophical position in Western culture, and still strongly shapes how we perceive and experience the relationship of our mind to our bodies, speaking about them as though they are separate entities rather than aspects of the same organic whole. Damasio argues in his book Descartes' Error that Descartes got it wrong. Far from being a separation between mind and body, the mind cannot exist or operate without a body. In other words, the perception that there is a separation between mind and body is a subjective one. Mind and body are experienced as separate from a phenomenological viewpoint, but in actuality, they are not. Yet our subjective experience of the body remains highly culturally determined. There's an interrelationship between the terms on the screen. The brain provides the physiological substrate of the mind. There is no brain without a body, no mind without a brain, and no psyche without a mind body. The term psyche is the most all-encompassing term because it extends beyond the individual mind-body organism. George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, philosophers and cognitive scientists, state a similar position. In the philosophy of the flesh, they assert the mind is inherently embodied. Thought is mostly unconscious. Abstract concepts are largely metaphorical. These are three major findings of cognitive science. More than 2 millennia of a priori philosophical speculation about these aspects of reason are over. Because of these discoveries, philosophy can never be the same again. When taken together, considered in detail, these three findings from the science of the mind are inconsistent with central parts of Western philosophy. Elsewhere, Mark Johnson, in The Meaning of the Body, writes that let me start over again on that. In The Mind of the Meaning of the Body, relying on research from cognitive science and neuroscience to support his argument that even our most abstract or cerebral cognitive activities are tied directly to the body. According to Johnson, even sophisticated cognitive processes, such as meaning, concepts, and language, have their roots in bodily experience, or what he terms the corporeal roots of symbolic meaning. Thus, experience, rather than being a top-down process directed by our mind, is actually a bottom-up process where the sensory affective processes of the body prompt the mind into action so that experience can be represented and expressed. This is significant for the Jungian world because we can easily become caught up in a fascination with dream, image, and story and lose sight that these emerge from somatic affective experience. Damasio puts it rather beautifully. Mental phenomenon can be fully understood only in the context of an organism's interacting in an environment. The soul breathes through the body, and suffering, whether it starts in the skin or in a mental image, happens in the flesh. The mind is not a separate system from the body, but rather an integral part of the body. Our most primal affective states arising from the limbic system, interacting with the demands of the body and environmental influences, set the pace and indirectly drive the mind's responses. These states are primarily communicated along affective pathways. Our emotions. In turn, our emotions prompt us to reflect, think, act, image, remember, and verbalize. In general, research into this area has come to be referred to as embodiment theory, which proposes that psychological processes are strongly influenced by and processed through the body, including motor systems, somatically experienced affects, and sensory perceptual processes. So again, turning back to Jung, how does this research fit with Jung? Surprisingly, quite well. In The Psychology of Dementia Praecox, Jung says the essential basis of our personality is affectivity. Thought and action are only symptoms of affectivity. Elsewhere, he says the ego is acquired, empirically speaking, through the individual's lifetime. It seems to arise in the first place from the collision between the somatic factor and the environment. And once established as a subject, it goes on developing from further collisions with the outer world and the inner. In On the Nature of the Psyche, published in 1947, he says psyche and matter are two different aspects of one and the same thing. And finally, from the Nietzsche's seminars, the Zarathustra seminars, he says the difference we make between the psyche and the body is artificial. It is done for the sake of better understanding. You cannot say that the mind is a function of the self without admitting that the body is also a function of the self. These trends were also anticipated early on by Freud, but diminished as an area of focus within his model. In 1890, Freud wrote, "The affects in the narrower sense are, it is true, characterized by a quite special connection with somatic processes. But strictly speaking, all mental states, including those that we usually regard as processes of thought, are to some degree affective, and not one of them is without its physical manifestation or incapable of modifying somatic processes." Building upon the role of the primary affects and somatic experience on the development of the self, we can now turn to how these elements interact with symbolic experience. According to Margaret Browning, who builds on research of primary emotion and neuroscience, as well as psychoanalysis and the philosophy of Susan Longer, the most fundamental layer of human experience is rooted in our affective experience. Based on her linking of Longer's philosophy with contemporary neuroscience and affective research, Browning argues that in the human species, affect not only motivates learning about the world, it also forms the basis of our symbolic minds. Summarizing Langer's philosophy, Browning states, we may equate affect with the capacity to feel, and state that it is the projection of feeling into form that is the basis of the symbolic process. Affectivity is the subcortical core of subjectivity. However, Langer also highlights the distinctive connection between symbols and affective consciousness. Browning summarizes the relationship described by Langer as follows. Symbols depend on the capacity to render affect into external form, most notably language. Psychoanalysis has always privileged affect as the basis of our mental lives, but has not necessarily recognized affect as the basis of our uniquely symbolic minds, and the import this has for the psychoanalytic theory and treatment. Browning continues with an elaboration of the relationship between affect, symbolic thought, and individuation, saying, the riches of a symbolic culture are vast, but they are always wielded from an emotional base. The capacity to feel, this affective consciousness, is the very basis of our unique symbolic minds, with which to a considerable degree we create ourselves. Hence, language is not abstract and divorced from symbolic process. Affect arises from the limbic system and soma, pushing for expression through symbolic thought, typically mediated through language. Browning brings into focus Langer's inclusion of imagination in her schema of the symbolic mind. Of special importance for Langer is the role of imagination. What the early appearance of symbolic communication afforded, and indeed was dependent on, was some voluntary control over this faculty for imagining. Feeling is what the human species utilizes in its unique fashion to create symbols, symbols that embed us in a culture mediated by these very symbols themselves. In our exploration of the affective somatic core of the self, it is important to note that language is also embodied. A simple example of the embodiment of language is the experience of physical motion through space. According to Geary, the bodily sensation of physical motion is scaffolded onto mental concepts of geographic space and chronological motion through time. In other words, the sensation of physical movement is the impetus for the activation of metaphors used to translate the sensation of movement into other domains of experience, while retaining elements of the original stimulus experience. As illustrated in this image, in Western culture, movement is often spoken about directionally, forward or backward. Yet these word concepts are also used to refer to past and future. While mood is often referenced in terms of direction in relationship to the body, either up or down. The common phrases depicted in this image did not arise out of common language patterns. They emerge from sensations in the body that seek expression in words. The words that emerge are then framed with reference to the body. Subjective understanding of both abstract and emotional concepts is shown to rely on embodied experience. An example of this is the tendency to associate emotion with bodily spatial position. I'm up today, or I'm on top of the world, are used to refer to the state of being happy, while I'm down in the dumps today is used to express a feeling of sadness or unhappiness. Similarly, a color perception blue is also used to express sadness. The emotion of envy is also expressed utilizing color. I'm green with envy. Love is frequently referred to in terms of physical force or sensation. There were sparks flying. It was electric. Johnson indicates that cognitive research is consonant with our theory of how language and image schemas emerge from bodily processes involving cross-modal perception. Janine Venona summarizes contemporary research in the neurological and cognitive science, demonstrating the reciprocal influence of words on brain, mind, and body. She indicates that language itself is grounded in sensoromotor experience. This conception of words as intertwined with aspects of lived experience is consistent with the contemporary view of language as embodied, which allows that language can have somatic and experiential concomitants, consequences, or both. Such studies demonstrate that cognition and language are grounded in embodied experiences, and that sensory perception and motor action support human understanding of words and concepts. Similarly, Lockoff and Johnson, that I mentioned earlier, conclude that reason and language largely develop unconsciously, strongly influenced and shaped by perception, emotion, motion, and other bodily capacities. Vivona goes on to describe the experiential linkages between embodiment, lived experience, and language acquisition found in mother-infant interactions. She says words are by nature embodied, having grown out of sensuous lived experiences. Language, in the form of the sounds of the mother's speech, imbues the infant's lived experience from the beginning of life. The sounds of mother's speech are part of the infant's experience of interacting with the mother. And over time, those sounds become differentiated from other sensations of the lived world as a special kind of sound. These special sounds grow into words. The word is neither wholly separate from its experiential foundations, nor wholly merged in it. In other words, it retains both elements. French psychoanalyst Danila Quinados carries similar themes into the realm of the therapeutic encounter. She says, I define a language that touches as one that does not confine itself to imparting thoughts verbally, but also conveys feelings and the sensations that accompany those feelings. If the words I pronounce as an analyst awaken or reawaken bodily fantasies in the patient, these words may enable him to find an emotional meaning in forgotten sensory or bodily experiences, which may then become a starting point for his work of thinking and of symbolization. As Joyce McDougall points out in her book, Theaters of the Body, regardless of the approach to the body, eventually there is a need to verbally convey the analyst's understanding of somatic experience through interpretation. Or as Alessandra Lima puts it, in Bionian terms, such bodily experiences need to become thoughts with a thinker, to play on Bion's turn of phrase, and eventually to be shared with the patient in order to support the development of a capacity to symbolize. In summary, words and language are embodied from the beginning of the human developmental process. While there is value and utility in deepening awareness of somatic experience in analytic therapy, it is not accurate when language is portrayed as largely rational, cognitive experience, which is detached from somatic experience. Rather, language is embodied from the beginning and is a cohesive and interrelated element of our fundamental experience. For me, Wilfred Bion's model of the psyche has become an important complement to my orientation as a Jungian analyst. Bion's model offers a way of reflecting on and engaging with the primordial affective somatic states that form the foundation of the self described by Alcaro, Carta, and Panskeep. A method which is not explicitly developed in Jung's model. Bion offers a process of metabolizing unsymbolized aspects of experience which have never been conscious and have never been repressed because they have never risen to the level of a thought or mental representation. In other words, for the defenses of the psyche to work, something has to be represented in the psyche that the psyche is uncomfortable with and tries to get rid of in a variety of different ways. Working at the level Bion outlines allows these experiences to become available for reflection and symbol production. So just a brief introduction to Bion's model. Bion relies on 4 concepts to outline the process of the transformation from unrepresented, unsymbolized experience into the psychological experience available for symbolic production. Beta elements, alpha function, alpha elements, and reverie. Bion describes beta elements as raw bits of unmetabolized, undigested proto-experience, which are precursory to sensory, psychic, affective, or somatic experience. These bits do not have meaning and are not sufficiently formed or coalesced to be reflected upon. Because beta elements operate outside awareness and have not yet been represented, they are not available for thought, reflection, or learning, and are not yet subject to repression or other defense mechanisms. Alpha elements are experiences which have become sufficiently coalesced to be reflected upon. They are produced from the impressions of experience which have been made storable and available for dream thoughts and for unconscious waking thoughts, operating below the threshold of consciousness. Alpha elements do not yet have meaning, but are capable of being worked with as psychological events by an individual. Somewhat analogous to the way in which words can be grouped together to form sentences and paragraphs, which have narrative meaning. Alpha elements become building blocks of experience, which have the potential to become connected together to form symbolic thoughts. The alpha function refers to the capacity of the analyst to contain elements of their psyche and the patient's psyche while engaging in reverie about the patient's beta elements in order to facilitate their transformation into alpha elements. In order for the patient to learn from experience, the alpha function of the analyst must operate on the awareness, with an awareness of the proto-emotional experience of the patient until the patient develops sufficient alpha function to participate in the process as a mutually constellated alpha function. Interpretations generated from the analyst's alpha function are not intended to give the patient understanding or meaning per se, but rather to help the patient recognize these experiences, develop a language for describing and remembering them, and to facilitate the organization of previously unorganized experience. The alpha function is similar to the transcendent function, except in Jung's model, the transcendent function operates to generate symbolic material and functions intrapsychically. While in Bion's model, the alpha function operates intersubjectively and on the level of the pre-representational, the pre-symbolic. We can think of alpha function as operating on a more fundamental layer of transformation than the transcendent function, the level of very small, almost imperceptible shifts, which transform unintegrated elements of experience into usable bits of experience. These transformed bits become the building blocks of larger shifts involved with the symbolization process of the transcendent function and the capacity to individuate. For Bion, Reverie is the primary way of accessing, perceiving, experiencing, and working with the states and psychic elements outlined by Bion, an analyst engaging non-representational experience. The use of reverie does not involve an active search for an image, metaphor, archetypal theme, or theory to explain something being experienced with the patient. Reverie is an opening to one's own internal stream of conscious and unconscious promptings, opening to ideas, thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, images, urges, fantasies, metaphors, and sometimes archetypal themes. Reverie involves being receptive on many levels to the experience and communication, both implicit and explicit, of the other person's presence in the room. It also includes a sensitivity to the emerging analytic third in the reverie field. The final area of research that ties together the various threads we've explored thus far is research on metaphor. Metaphor serves as a bridge between affect, soma, symbol, cognition, and archetype. Metaphor can be defined as the utilization of one conceptual or imaginal domain to map or articulate the experience of a different conceptual or imaginal domain. Therefore, it transfers meaning between domains of experience, that is, from conscious to unconscious, cognitive to somatic, somatic to affective, past to present, or present to future. Linking realms in ways not previously seen, and transforming meaning by means of novel recombinations between domains. The centrality of metaphor to psychic transformation is strongly supported by contemporary neuroscience. In contrast to reading ordinary prose, research demonstrates that the midline affective areas of the brain react powerfully when encountering metaphor, such as we might encounter in reading in terms of reading Shakespeare, in contrast to a newspaper article. Philip Davis is a professor of English literature at the University of Liverpool, who studies Shakespeare's patterns of thought as reflected in his writings. And he recruited some neuroscientists to design a study of the impact on the brain of Shakespeare's linguistic and syntactic choices. Utilizing functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI technology, researchers studied functional shifts in the brain activity when exposed to metaphor. They demonstrated how Shakespeare's metaphorical use of language creates shifts in mental pathways and opens new possibilities of thought, self-reflection, and associative connections. Passages from Shakespeare significantly increased neural complexity and activity in the volunteers. The metaphorical passages associated with Shakespeare resulted in a distribution of activity bilaterally across both hemispheres of the brain, a state of the brain also associated with increased creativity and complex neural engagement. The metaphoric passages also resulted in more involvement of the emotional centers of the midbrain. Ordinary prose, such as found in newspapers or nonfiction material, did not elicit these patterns of neural arousal in the subjects. The researchers conclude that the human brain is optimized to respond powerfully to metaphor in these very areas that have been identified by Alcaro, Carta, and Panskeep as the affective core of the self. So if you look at this slide here, this is from Theory et al. 2008, titled Event-Related Potential Characterization of Shakespearean Functional Shift in Narrative Sentence Structure from NeuroImage. In this top frame, what you see is the brain activity of the subject reading ordinary prose. And these green crosshairs that you see are the mass of neural activity. the central mass of neural activity. So you can see that when we're reading ordinary prose, the activity of the brain is definitively unicameral, only involving one hemisphere of the brain. If you look over to the right here, you can see that most of the center of activity is in the forebrain, where we do all of our executive conscious functioning, where we're planning our grocery lists, how to get to the Walmart, etc. The bottom line of images is from a subject reading Shakespeare. And again, if you pay attention to the green crosshatches, you'll see that the activity is decidedly bicameral now, involving both hemispheres of the brain, and has dropped down from the forebrain into the midbrain, into the amygdala and the hypothalamus. Again, this is where we process our emotional centers and motivations. So it's very powerful evidence that the human psyche is organized to process metaphoric material. Another study by Lacey, Still, and Stasian found similar results using simple textual metaphors. Again, using fMRI technology, the researchers contrasted the responses to simple sentences paired, which carried similar meanings, such as "I had a bad day" versus "I had a rough day." In the second sentence, a simple textual metaphor is offered as a statement of psychological experience, rough. The somatosensory cortex, the part of the brain that is involved in processing texture during touch, also activated when processing the second sentence, "I had a rough day," but not with the first, "I had a bad day." This study provides further evidence that the brain unconsciously moves out of its typical response pattern when metaphor is encountered. So if you look at the slide, the red and yellow areas are areas of the brain that have been activated by actual physical touch of a textual surface. The green areas, OP1 and OP3, are areas of the brain that are activated simply by reading the sentence, "I had a rough day." And those areas are not activated reading the sentence, "I had a bad day." These studies also demonstrate why it is critical for therapists and analysts, as much as possible, to frame interpretations in metaphorical language. In analytic therapy, interpretation is effective when it is framed in metaphoric terms because it activates a translation from one domain of experience to another. Whether an interpretation incorporates archetypal imagery, elements of the patient's personal narrative, or references from the cultural landscape, at the most fundamental level, an interpretation is most effective when it incorporates a metaphor. Lockoff and Turner describe metaphor as a tool so ordinary that we use it unconsciously and automatically. It is omnipresent. Metaphor suffuses our thoughts, no matter what we are thinking about. Metaphor allows us to extend ourselves and our world in ways no other modes of thought can. Metaphors are constantly utilized, both consciously and unconsciously, in everyday life and language. Everyday speech is filled with somatic metaphors. I'm all tied up in knots. The weight of the world is on my shoulders. I feel trapped. It feels like somebody is standing on my chest. It feels like my head is in a vice. It's a real pain in my neck, or I've got my back against the wall. It is a property of mind, soul, psyche, and body that is uniquely human. Therefore, metaphors have the capacity to engage and integrate, not only feeling and thought, but also soul. Metaphor bridges body, affect, image, and language. It is important to emphasize that metaphor is not merely linguistic. Arnold Modell refers to metaphor as the bridge between knowledge and feelings, and indicates that metaphor is fundamentally an embodied experience, not just language. Like language in general, metaphor is also embodied. Modell indicates that metaphor is now viewed as an emergent property of the mind. Metaphor is rooted in the body in two senses. Metaphor is used to organize bodily sensation cognitively, especially affects. And secondly, metaphor is rooted in the body as it rests on the border between mind and brain. Later, Modell emphasizes the close relationship between metaphor and affect, saying, metaphor and affects enjoy a privileged connection. Inchoate feelings that are cognitively unspecified require metaphors. So again, this speaks back to Bion's notion of beta elements being converted to alpha elements. These inchoate feelings that Modell is referring to can be seen as synonymous with Jung's concept of beta elements. Metaphor and embodied action. Metaphor influences our perceptions, anticipations, and preparedness for action. Modell asserts that we unconsciously interpret our affective world by means of metaphor in preparation for action, which is quite similar to a definition from Jung that Jung offers for the archetype and its function, where he says archetypes are systems of readiness for action. Hence, metaphor is a pattern detector which recognizes similarities and differences, applying them to both past, present, and future. At times, metaphorical experience may appeal to the intellect, but it reaches more deeply, making connections between somatic, emotional, and imaginal levels of experience, rather than solely cognitive. Metaphor is the process that allows sacred texts, music, art, poetry, dance, and film to move us, bringing our imaginations to life and giving form to bodily sensation. I believe the following excerpt from a session illustrates well the central role of affective experience, embodiment, and metaphor to the process of analytic transformation. This session occurred during the patient's 5th year of analysis, 3 times per week on the couch. I've intentionally left details of her background because I want to focus primarily on the moment of discovery and transition in Nicole's analysis. This session followed a series of sessions that felt particularly deep and affectively engaged. In this interaction, there were frequently periods of silent reflection by both of us. This excerpt begins just a few minutes into the session. Nicole says, I thought about what I said about Greg's sadness. I hope I'm not projecting. I say, your default is almost always towards self-doubt. She pauses and says, yes, this morning I was breathing. I felt something holding me together between breaths. It felt so good. I didn't want to get up, but I did, and I saw the sunrise painted across the sky. I felt myself like I had been written into the book of life. I'm shaking like a leaf. I feel like all of my parts are there. Like, is this what everyone feels all of the time? I say, I think this is what babies feel that allows them to know they're alive. She says, I don't think I'm quaking with fear. It's like I'm the right size paper to fit into my envelope, like I'm all in. I don't know what I was like as an infant. I remember being a girl. Most of the time I feel like a girl dressing up as a woman. Now I don't feel like a girl, like I'm sound. I say you seem to be experiencing a new ground of being, an absence of which may have contributed to your anxiety and the feeling of being a girl. Nicole says, I never thought I'd be without that. That's just what I thought being alive was. I'm shaking, but not anxious today. It's like I went to sleep and someone knit me together, wholly, but unfinished. It makes me I'd love to be at the beach, take off all my clothes and sprawl on the warm sand, the feel of the sun everywhere, and have no idea of the passage of time, like the naked babies you sometimes see at the beach. This is the first time I can really feel that. I say, if this were the only thing we ever accomplished here, it's well worth the effort. Nicole continues, like discovering another body, but it's mine and always has been mine. Being on warm sand is the opposite of clenching, closing up. The terrible thing is that I might never have experienced it myself. I'm not looking back in any specific way, but I wonder what I'd be like if I had known this. It reminds me of a dream from several years ago, which was of an infant under my driveway, frozen in ice. She pauses and says, Mark, it's so exquisite outside. The air is so cold. Pauses again and says, so by all accounts, I'm about 8 hours old. I say, your quickening day. This is a mutual reference to a movie, Highlander 2, The Quickening, which we had spoken about in a previous session. The term quickening has its origins from Aristotle, who used the phrase quickening to describe the moment the fetus becomes animated or ensouled in the womb. Of course, I'm not speaking that. I just said your quickening day, assuming that she would get the metaphor. She laughs and says it's almost too much. I say, like an infant making new discoveries, like discovering their own hand as it moves through space. She says, that's how I feel about my legs right now. She begins to sob, sobs that seem connected to joy. She says, I have legs. I knew it, but I don't think I ever really felt them before. So a few concluding thoughts. A few proposals for Jungian training and practice based on the research reviewed. The research reviewed underscores the function of metaphor as translating affect and somatic experience into image and thought. And I believe analytical psychology would do well to think of metaphor as an umbrella which weaves together elements we typically refer to as archetypal material. I believe the metaphoric foundation of analytical psychology is overshadowed by an emphasis on archetype, image, and symbol. Jung asserts that the psyche is mythopoetic, meaning that the psyche creates myths, and myths serve as metaphors for ways of perceiving, experiencing, understanding, and being in the world. Concepts like myth, symbol, image, imaginal, and mythopoesis all involve metaphorical processes. We are taught to think of myths, fairy tales, religious motifs, and alchemy as representations of the collective unconscious and potential symbols. But on the most fundamental level, these systems all function as metaphors. I propose that we should be thinking less about where these images and themes originate from, that is, whether they originate from a collective unconscious or from some other process, and more about the function that they serve, which is to engage the affective somatic core of the self. The centrality of metaphor for analysis is clearly stated by Jung, but it remains an unappreciated or under-recognized aspect of his model. He says an archetypal content expresses itself in metaphors. If such a content should speak of the sun and identify it with the lion, the king, the hoard of gold guarded by the dragon, or the power that makes for the life and health of man, it is neither the one thing nor the other, but the unknown third thing that finds more or less adequate expression in all these similes. Yet to the perpetual vexation of the intellect remains unknown and not to be fitted into formula. Not for a moment dare we succumb to the illusion that an archetype can finally be explained and disposed of. Even the best attempts at explanation are only more or less successful translations into another metaphorical language. In my experience with a wide variety of Jungian training programs, material on dreams, images, symbols, and archetypes receive the greatest amount of focus in most training programs, followed by theory. An emphasis on affect is present, but is a somewhat overlooked middle child. With few exceptions, somatic experience, technique, and transference countertransference are treated as neglected stepchildren. Metaphor as a mode of experience and a foundation for interpretation is typically not addressed directly. Based on the material on the core affective self presented by Alcaro, Carta, and Panskeep, as well as the additional research around primary affects, somatic experience, embodied language, and metaphor, I propose that Jungian analytic training and practice should be revisioned or recentered, with a central focus on affective and somatic experience as mediated through metaphor. In such a revised model, dream, image, symbol, archetype, technique, and theory would be seen as tools for engaging, understanding, integrating, and transforming the interwoven affective, somatic, and metaphoric domains of the patient's experience. Let's stop share. There it is. Okay. All right. So there's a lot of material in that. Hopefully there's some reactions to that. And we've got about 15 minutes or so to have a discussion about this or reactions to it.
And just as a reminder, if you have a comment or a question, feel free to use the raise hand function under the reactions button, or raise your human hand and I'll call on you.
Or your mammalian hand.
Yes. And John?
Yes, hi, Mark, thank you so much. I completely enjoyed this presentation. It is so relevant to the work I've been doing. It puts a lot of structure and voice and shape to it. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for integrating the neuroscience and the other analytic perspectives. My research area is in emotional intelligence. So do you see any connection, or I would say, what connections do you see? There's obviously connections, but what connections do you see that could be there with emotional intelligence?
Well, I think that all of this stuff is very connected to emotional intelligence, and that if we have a well-connected pathway for processing our affects, that is essential to emotional intelligence. In other words, emotional intelligence is what we do with our affects. And if we don't have access to them and we don't value them and see them as a source of emotional data, then we can't really have emotional intelligence.
Okay. Yeah,
So I think it's directly reflected. I would just add in, I think something that Jung talks about as reflective function fits nicely with the idea of emotional intelligence, reflective function simply being the capacity to reflect and wonder about one's experience. And this comes into the psychoanalytic world through Peter Fonage's work of mentalization.
Yes.
So I think whether you refer to it as mentalization or reflective function, for me, those are core elements of emotional intelligence.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, John. Yeah.
We also have a question in the chat, and then Barbara Miller. The question is from Andre Serbu. How do you differentiate between metaphor and symbol?
Okay, I differentiate metaphor and symbol according to Jung's definition of symbol. And he says whether or not something is a symbol depends primarily on the consciousness that perceives it. So I think in the Jungian world, unfortunately, symbol gets bandied about much too loosely. And people will talk about symbols, but they don't give. So, for example, in supervision, a candidate will say, oh, and then this symbol emerged in this dream. And I'll ask, well, how did the patient react to the image? And they said, oh, I don't know. And so I give them Jung's reflection of whether or not something is a symbol or not depends primarily on the consciousness that perceives it. So just because it comes up in a dream or a metaphor or some other slip of the tongue or something, that doesn't make it a symbol. Whether it's a symbol is a functional capacity that brings something alive in the patient that the patient connects to and carries forward over a period of time. So instead of thinking of images that appear in dreams or things that are in the archetypal record as symbols, I think of them as images that are potential symbols. Whether they land and register with somebody's experience is what makes it a symbol or not. So metaphors, to give the succinct answer to the question, metaphors are simply potential symbols. They potentially carry symbolic function. Again, even though we can't defend against this metaphoric reaction that's in our brains, it's universal. All subjects that were in these experiments showed the same pattern. We can defend against the experience of the metaphor. So even if it brings something alive in us, we can still attempt to try to suppress that reaction. So the metaphor is a potential symbol, and whether it connects with the patient is what determines whether it is actually a living symbol.
And Barbara, it is Barbara, right? I only see B.
Yes.
Oh, great.
It's B. Miller's Barbara. Thank you so much, Mark. I really got a lot out of this. I'd like to just give a comment for your last part where you're talking about what is or what is not taught at training institutes. I think that certainly over time, the emphasis changes in every training institute. But I would suggest that indeed affect, soma, and metaphor was not missing from my training at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich back in the 90s. And I would say that I found that in their emphasis on the complex and the word association experiment.
Mhm.
It was a great part of my experience of training.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's clearly where it's most strongly represented in Jung's work also, and most readily accessible. And I would just like to see it taken in a more broader view of it, not just in the word association experiment and not just associated with complex, but as the foundation of experience is the real shift and emphasis that I'm talking about. I think, yeah, most people value affects in analysis, although for certain themes, from my experience, for example, Gigerich is not so connected to the affective experience. And to me, the material that Gigerich presents, somewhat it's hard to find the patient in Gigerich's material. But that's a bit of an aside. Yes, I'm just, I think that what I would like to see is a more differentiated, more deepened use or understanding of affect and metaphor and analytic training that I think would bring us, expand us out of just the Jungian world and allow a dialogue with other psychoanalytic and academic disciplines.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Brian?
I just wanted to thank you very much. I think what you've spoken just speaks to me so loudly. What you say about metaphor at the end and the ideas of how the word collective unconscious is sort of misused to cover over so much. It's just wonderful. I think the only thing I would disagree with is about Gigerich. I do think he actually uses extended imagery of symbols in a very feeling way, but it's not obvious.
Okay.
It certainly is not obvious. But,
yes,
think
and
it's
I'll confess I'm not as well versed in Gigerich as I might be. So it's a bit of an initial impression, having read some.
Yeah.
And I do have close friends like Greg Mogeson, who's very good at explaining where the patient is in Gigerich's writing.
But really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
I have a question, or I think really amusing more than anything, if it's okay.
Yeah.
When my mother passed away, I had this need to gather family history before her generation passed away entirely, because only one sister was left, one sibling. And so unfortunately, she didn't remember anything. But I started to talk about dreams and images that came up for me, or visions that came up during the day that had nothing to do with memories. And in sharing that with her, she would suddenly go, "Oh, wait, I remember. I remember us crossing the river. I remember the name of the river." And so I'm wondering how this is connected. Your talk today is connected also to memory.
It's connected to memory in the sense that memories are representations. And so any memory has to be represented in some way and has to have associative links. And what you provided to your mother was the associative links that allowed her to access memory. And those are probably most, we know that memory is very affectively determined, and that when we have an affective response to a situation, we're more likely to remember it. And when it's a more neutral response to a situation, we're less likely to remember it. So those are the only comments I'd have about memory, is that it's dealing with the realm of representation, and the access to it is largely through affects.
Okay, so something about those shared dreams and visions as pulling
Yeah.
something deeper.
Right. It's just like I'm sure you've seen the videos of patients with Alzheimer's who are then played music that they were familiar with as a younger person, and all of a sudden they come alive. They can often sing along with the song. Sometimes they start dancing when they haven't danced in decades, and so again, we know music is powerfully connected to metaphor, to affect, to somatic rhythms, and that's why it works so well in those sort of patients, and that nothing else works as effectively in Alzheimer's patients at reactivating memories that have been inaccessible through conscious thought.
Thank you. We also have a question in the chat from Dragana. She said her connection isn't really good right now. She's saying, I loved the neuroscience part, the imaging studies on the Shakespearean semantics. Do you know some studies in, for different languages? Are metaphors language independent, and how is communication between different languages modified by metaphors differently used in different languages?
I don't have a lot of in-depth knowledge of that. One thing that we do know is that language itself is a metaphor, that these words represent something else, and they're not you can't describe fullness of something called orange, for example, but we have an idea about orange, and the word orange evokes our mental and affective responses to orangeness. A couple of interesting things about language and hemispheric activation is now we know from people who do simultaneous translation that over time, one hemisphere of their brain is listening and the other hemisphere of the brain is translating. And so the receptive hemisphere becomes the one that gathers the original words in the original language, and then the other hemisphere translates those words into another language. And they've done fMRI studies that demonstrate the difference in activity that's going on there. But maybe more connected to Dragana's question is a very interesting study. I think it was in Panama, where there were some remote villages, and they had a unusual outbreak of congenital deafness. And they didn't have any interpreters. They didn't have any access to international sign language. And so these local residents that were deaf developed their own sign language. And then for whatever reason, they didn't really identify the reason for this congenital deafness in this cohort of residents of this village. But the linguists that found out about it recognized a research opportunity. And so the language, the sign language they developed was very exaggerated gestures, and they had a fairly limited vocabulary. And over time, as this outbreak of congenital deafness left the cohort and people became, the majority of the village could hear again and return to continue to use verbal language, those people gradually became more isolated and only spoke within themselves. And they went in and did an evaluation of their conceptual capacities compared to normal hearing adults and in the village, and found that their conceptual capacity was extremely compromised by their limited vocabulary. Then another outbreak of congenital deafness happened about 20 years later. And this group, the younger group, took up the original sign language that had been developed, but they refined it and expanded it, and they had a much larger vocabulary that developed, and they evaluated these younger individuals and found that because their vocabulary was wider, they had a wider range of metaphors available, their conceptual capacity was much greater. Then a third thing happened, and they built some centers in which encouraged the younger deaf residents and the older deaf residents to interact and communicate. And they developed some structured activities, getting the older residents to interact with the younger residents that were also deaf. And over time, the older residents acquired the expansion of the sign language. And when they were reassessed over a period of time, their conceptual capacity had expanded because the number of metaphors they had available to them in the sign language was much wider. So again, it serves as kind of a environmental illustration of the importance of having metaphor available to us in terms of whether we refer to it as emotional intelligence, as Brian did, or increased capacity of reflection. The more diverse our imagery is that we're exposed to, and the more responsive we are to it, the deeper our experience becomes.
Looks like Constance, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think, Mark, I think you said something along the lines of, I propose that Jungian analytical training and practice should be revisioned or recentered with a central focus on somatic experiences mediated through metaphor. So I'm just wondering, how would your model change the training? Would that be courses or supervision? And then I'm wondering on how do you work on the feeling function? How do you deal with the candidate who is not demonstrating this capacity that you're promoting? And should we read Shakespeare? That's it.
Yeah. Yes, we should all be reading Shakespeare. We should be reading a lot of poetry. We should be reading a lot of literature. And it's not that we shouldn't focus on archetype or we shouldn't focus on dream. It's that we shouldn't hold it up and kind of valorize these things as being somehow uniquely separate from their adjuncts to our experience. They shape and inform our experience. So I would rather see Jungian institutes have fewer classes on archetypal material and less emphasis on memorizing myth, fairy tale, religion, and alchemy. We do need some in-depth exposure to it. But for example, if you read, a myth from ancient Persia, you might have one experience in your analytic career that you actually utilize that myth with a patient.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're studying metaphor and immersing yourself in metaphor, you might use that one, you might use a dozen other ones because they all seem relevant. The idea is to get used to swimming in the world of metaphor. Just an anecdotal example of this is James Joyce's daughter was diagnosed as having some kind of psychotic process going on, and he asked Jung to evaluate her. And Jung or Joyce asked, "What's wrong with my daughter?" And Jung rather poetically said, "Your daughter is drowning in the waters that you swim in," meaning that Joyce was very adept at working with metaphor in his books, and that for him, it was as natural as swimming. For his daughter, she was overwhelmed by that material. So I would just place less emphasis on learning bunches and bunches of archetypes, and valorizing archetypes as the thing to get to, rather than understanding archetypes in terms of how they appear in and shape an individual's experience. So I think we tend to throw a lot of material at patients that they aren't ready to digest, that they don't have an adequate symbolic function to process, and we're actually doing either we're not helping them transform, or we're actually getting in the way of transformation by heaping archetypal material at them. So I go into this in a completely different topic called working with, that's been published in JAP, called Working with Disruptions in Symbolic Capacity. And that I think, in my estimation, about 80% of my patients that come to see me initially don't have an adequate symbolic function to really be thrown into the deep water of myth, fairy tale, and religion.
We have a couple in the chat, and then Dawn and Brian. Okay. In the chat, is it possible to share the citation for the Panama study? And then also on slide 12 that you had said something about experience of the body is culturally determined.
Yes, I can probably find the citation of the Panama study. I don't have it immediately available, but I can, Sonia, is there a way we can send that out to the participants?
Yes, if you just email me, then
okay. All right. Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. And then Dawn?
Hello there. I'm based in the UK.
Okay.
And I've just been through mentalization training, adult mentalization training. I think, Mark, I'll tell you what's coming to mind is that what you've been talking about today, I think I've been trying to describe it for a long time, and the form that that's taken for me in my working life is I have Jungian supervision, and I'm not even really talking about patients all that much. I actually am talking about feeling very professionally frustrated about what actually happens, and the conversations that happen around me don't fit my experience of the work. And I think you've probably actually just put in the last bit of the missing jigsaw. So I'm actually trying to write something at the moment. It probably will be why mentalization, why now? And one of the examples has been, if I just use one of the examples, in the supervision group, there's 3 of us. I write poetry, and I had somebody in the group's a CBT therapist, somebody's integrative, and I refer to how I work, that I work with the unconscious. And one of my own poems came to mind, and I actually I said that, and I then said about a woman scorned, to do with one of my colleagues was talking about their patients, and it went down like a lead balloon. And I'm not really allowed to do that. Like I was being sort of gratuitous and self-indulgent. And I'm just writing down example because I just have that wall to wall in my working life. Actually, I work for the NHS, and it's all like that, and it's very very different actually.
Yeah,
So
I think it's yeah, you're welcome. It's certainly even when I was in my PhD training in the 1980s, all of that was certain, that those influences were certainly coming into being. And there was one psychoanalytic course offered in my PhD training, and when I went to my major area professor to ask him if I could sign up for that, because he had to sign off on all of my course requests, he said, "I'll sign it, but I don't understand why you would want to take that course when there's real courses you could take."
Okay.
So yes, that attitude has been prevalent for 40 years now, and yeah, we have to. There's ample evidence to suggest that this is not only valid, but also incredibly effective, this way of working. And it's actually more effective than CBT. As many of you may know, that CBT, after 4 months, this is a large-scale study called the DART study, which compared CBT to medication. And they found that 4 months after discontinuation of treatment, the patient was back at baseline. Even though they showed significant progress during the course of CBT therapy, they were back at baseline 4 months later. So, like, for example, antidepressants have a treatment effect size of a 0.32, with one being a very, very strong effect size. Cognitive behavioral therapy has an effect size of 0.67, which is strong if you measure it only at the conclusion of the treatment. At the conclusion of psychoanalytic treatment, of which Jung is one of the schools of psychoanalytic thought, the treatment effect size is 0.97. Now, Peter Fonagy in the UK identified a group of pretty severe borderline patients, which, as many of you know, is one of the more difficult patient populations to treat. And they had a partial hospitalization program followed by individual therapy and medication management for 18 months. And then therapy discontinued, but they followed them longitudinally and continued annually to do overall life satisfaction, subjective experience, as well as objective measures of psychological and physical functioning, such as ability to work, use of healthcare, etc. The treatment, they measured them for 8 years. No further treatment other than medication management. 8 years. The treatment effect size at the conclusion of 8 years was 2.12. The treatment effect size doubled over the course of the 8 years. The only way to really explain that is that psychoanalytic therapy changes the way we process experience, what we were talking about earlier, reflective function or mentalization. That's what changes in psychoanalytic therapy done well, is our capacity to process our own experience. I'm not sure if you wanted all of that, but it came out anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's how it's applied, actually, the mentalization, because they're actually, it's a little bit pile them high, sell them cheap, because they're delivering it to so many people. And some people aren't, some people aren't, I work with personality disorder, some people aren't therapists.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're maybe being mental health nurses or something like that. And I'm finding it very difficult personally. I mean, I like the model but just the learning has been quite difficult.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways, you know, there are short-term models of psychoanalytic psychotherapy that are limited to like 12 sessions. Milan and Mon in the UK are both developed programs around psychoanalytic psychotherapy in a short-term dynamic model. And we're not sure whether those types of interventions result in the same kind of long-term changes that we see in unlimited psychoanalytic psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. Brian, do you want to go again?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mark. Again, I'm sorry, I loved what you said. I'm particularly interested in neurodiversity. And it seems to me that our approach to the symbolic is very top-down, which shuts out the ability of people who have some degree of neurodiversity to function. And if we actually just get on with it and use the natural symbols that just arise in the discussion and in referring to popular television and everything else, you find that there's not such a dearth. It's actually, I think, a problem from the therapist and lacking imagination here, rather than something intrinsic.
I would agree with you 100% about that.
Yeah.
There's a guy named Bacall, B-A-C-A-L, who has in the U.S. who has developed a thing that he refers to as specificity theory. And what his basic idea is that we should not be trying to figure out how to fit our patients into our theories or into our archetypal patterns, but we should try to be understanding who the patient is and how these various influences shape them. And anytime we get away from the individual, in some sense, we've lost the individual.
Exactly. And then I think a little bit of meliotherapy, which has got a similar feel to it, really. Again, not trying to therapy the patient, but just make things easier for them so they can function. And then they blossom in their own way.
Yeah, and probably there's an element of, for those patients that blossom under that condition, is that what they needed was containment and mirroring.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, Vicky Joe has a comment that some studies show that the CBT therapists wanted to go into therapy for themselves and they turned to depth psychologists for their personal therapy. Yes, I think that's definitely, I've seen that pattern any number of times, both in my own practice and also heard it anecdotally. And Jonathan Shedler, who wrote in 2010 the first large-scale meta-analysis of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, where he combined dozens of studies and then equalized the treatment outcomes so that they could be compared. And what he identifies about 7 different elements of therapy in general that essentially began in psychoanalytic psychotherapies and have been adopted somewhat implicitly by most other therapies. And so what he does is he identifies in that article the psychoanalytic the psychoanalytic foundations of most other therapies that have formed since then.
Also, John has a question.
Yes, Mark, do you have a book or an article that directly speaks to what you presented today?
This one's coming out in a book, a set of proceedings. This particular presentation will be in the proceedings that'll be published by Routledge from this conference. But my book on interpretation in Jungian analysis, art and technique, certainly goes into a lot of this material on embodiment, metaphor, that sort of thing. So that would be one source. The other source is a newer book that I've just recently published called Jungian Psychoanalysis, a Contemporary Introduction. And so I summarize some of this material in that book as well.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like we're starting to wind down a little bit.
And then Dr. Vicky Joe just raised her hand.
Okay, that's fine. I'm here for the duration. Vicky Joe and I are Facebook friends, so we interact a bit online.
So, can you hear me, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted, I know that you don't tend to use typology in your work, but I wanted to share with you, because I'm involved with it right now on another project, that according to John Beebe, Jung originally confused the sensation function and the feeling function. And I recently edited an article by Tom Elsner where we were talking about like where do the feeling values come from? And I know when my values are threatened, my body just seizes up, and all the palpitations and breathing and et cetera. So they're very closely linked. And I find it interesting that it sounds like what you're saying in the training is there's a strong emphasis on, dare I say, the intuition function and the thinking function, but then feeling and sensation fell by the wayside. And of course, Jung has a reputation for skipping over sensation in general, but that's so much coming into play now. But I'm just noticing how much of what you were talking about is related to the feeling function without using those words. Like every time you said affect, I could almost say feeling function probably. So I just wanted to share that, and I find it interesting that Jung conflated them initially, and of course he did such a he was such a champion for honoring the feeling function, which in a way you're mirroring, although in a different way of doing it. But all the thinking types wanted to push feeling off the table and say, oh, that's affect, that's unconscious, that's da-da-da. And when Jung said feeling was a rational function, everybody lost their minds. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because you might find that of interest.
Yeah, I think that I think there's a lot of valuing of the feeling function in the Jungian world, but not so much an appreciation for, like, it's like, let's feel, but let's not think about what we're feeling or why we're feeling it. So to me, it's like an absence of integration of thinking and feeling, which I would like to see more of. I think there's too much reliance on what do I feel and what's my intuition. And we need more of an integration of the sensation and the thinking into the process in general. Of course, there's exceptions to any of the things I'm saying in different institutes around the world, and different cultures that those institutes exist in. But yeah, I've taught in a lot of places, and that seems to be one of the primary things, is not having a well-developed integration of thought and feeling, intuition and sensation, and that thinking and sensation are the ones that, for me, tend to get left out. But the most helpful thing about typology for me came from a book by Hans Diekmann called Methods in Analytical Psychology. And one of the things he talks about there is typological rotation. That, and he says, so the analyst, he feels, to be effective with a patient needs to be in the opposite typological orientation of the patient. So if the patient is introverted feeling, the analyst should attempt to process experience through sensation and thinking, because then essentially the analyst represents the inferior function for the patient. Now, I don't do that in a very conscious way, but I think it does, that idea does influence how I sit with different patients, and I access different, I process it, I try to find the avenue that they aren't processing it through and introduce that.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. That's been a topic in various ways. I think Witzig wrote his dissertation, and he was describing like trying to pair a patient with a modality of therapy that was treated, and I think he didn't have strong conclusions. But I think originally in Zurich, Jung believed you should be matched with someone of the same typology. But I think there's a lot of power in what you're saying, and what Diekmann said. I've read that material about the rotating, like that's usually where the development needs to happen. And Robert Johnson, and I appreciate him most of all, said that the advantage of learning typology is you learn the language of each of the types, so you can speak that language. And I think that's the critical point of all of it, wherever you are typologically across from or identical to, just to know the language and to be able to speak the language and even interpret the language.
Yeah, and James Masterson, who was a psychoanalyst who was popular in the United States in the 80s and 90s, wrote a lot about personality disorders and the self. He labeled that communicative matching. That whole process of finding the common language and utilizing the patient's language rather than giving the patient our language.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Barbara?
Yes, just a comment on this particular topic we're on. I love it very much. Just to say that Mary-Louise van France has said that she's put it this way. She said, matching the therapy and the patient, she said, put the two dummies together rather than because the if the therapist is strong where the patient is weak, then the therapist will be taking over the development. So that was Mary-Louise van France's idea. So well as I understand.
Ryan?
So just a little thought. I did work with people with pain and found myself using metaphors, trying to engage with them. And I was so impressed by hypnotherapists who were very adept at using the patient's imagery and working with it. And I think we have a lot to learn from the hypnotherapists as far as that.
Yes.
I think that fits with what you've been saying.
Yeah, my first training or my first specialization after I became a psychologist was in hypnotherapy. And there was a great deal I learned from hypnotherapy, even though I ultimately gave it up because it felt much like the patient wanted to come in and have me do something to them. In a way that felt I didn't enjoy the process of doing things to people. I wanted a participative process.
And there's a comment from Vicky Joe. Is that the clean language technique?
I'm not familiar with the clean language technique. Brian, are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not.
Yeah, some of just to broaden out just a little bit, a guy named Roy Schaefer, who is a really brilliant psychoanalyst and started off as a very classical Freudian and moved to become more aligned with the British object relations school. And he published a book in the late 80s called A New Language for Psychoanalysis. And it was his plea for psychoanalysis to move away from theorizing and imposing theories on the patient. And the whole idea was, as much as possible, frame your interactions with the patient in affectively grounded language and in action language, verbs, because verbs don't reify. When we label things, that reifies the experience rather than maintaining a connection to experience.
Can you give an example of what you just said using verbs?
Like if we just take one of the things that is commonly seen in the Jungian world, was somebody will bring in a dream with a kind of dark figure and say, oh, that's the shadow. So they'll label it rather than do something else with it. Whereas if we take the concept of shadow and frame it in terms of objective language as something they're doing with part of their experience, oh, that seems like the part of you that you've grown used to throwing away. So
Oh,
throwing away is the verb there. They don't need a label. They need to know what they're doing with something.
yeah. Okay. It seems to tie in with the image of the brain, you know, getting activated. Using the word rough.
Right.
It reminds me of
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah. So textures, anything that connects us to experience rather than categorizing or labeling is what's really more effective in analysis and therapy.
Thank you.
Ryan?
It's just that David Pete talked about using a language of doing in, I think it was Blackfoot, something like that. He wrote about his experience of Blackfoot Indians, and very much the same, talking about a language of verbs. Doing and a process. I mean, describing a tree as a process rather than as a thing, you know.
Yes. Yeah, and Hillman does a lot of this work in his writing, you know, and he'll take words that are nouns and make them into all sorts of different things. Like if an arrow appears in a dream, he'll say something like, well, that's being very arrowly of you, isn't it?
Yes.
So we can find it in a lot of different places, but I don't think it gets well integrated into practice often, unless we make a really judicious effort to focus on shaping our language and our interventions in that direction. Often when we're not focused on that, we tend to lapse into prose, into non-metaphoric language.
And I should have added that if I can remember what I was saying about the hypnotherapists, it was the way that we can introduce different metaphors that can actually muddy the waters a bit. And if we work much more creatively with what the person's produced themselves, that seems to be much more fruitful, creative.
Right, and going back to the Beyond material, where we have to deviate from that is when the patient literally is inchoate, inarticulate about that experience. They'll say something like, there's something happening in my body, but I don't know what to call it. Yes. Or I'm having a feeling, but I have no idea what that feeling is about. And that's when the analyst has to move into their own reverie as the source, not as a declarative statement of this is what it is, but introducing an idea and an experience to the patient for the patient to see if it has any resonance with them. And sometimes they'll say, no, I don't think that has anything to do with what I'm talking about, but I don't have any better words for it. Or sometimes they'll say it's not that, but it does make me think of this, and that does feel connected to what I'm trying to describe.
And it's
so
something
in other
that's
words,
done, it's something that's done judiciously and carefully, coming out of that experience of reverie. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think that Elliot Juris uses the term aporetic emotions. There's a sense of feeling, but you can't label it. You don't know what it is, but it's something there.
Right.
That's connected with the mentalizing. He uses the term mentalizing in his book.
Yeah, he's got you're referring to his book, Minding the Emotions, I think, isn't it?
Yes, that's the one. Right.
Yeah, he's really, really good at talking about emotional affective life, emotional regulation. He prefers to refer to it as affective modulation because he doesn't want to introduce the idea that we in some way shape our own emotion, but we do want to be like the surfer who can get on the wave and ride the emotion without getting thrown into the water.
That's quite a metaphor.
Yeah. I may have gotten it from Jurist, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, I see we're almost out of time here. I really appreciate all the questions and interactions.
Thank you.
I see some other familiar faces from Zurich that I have known for a long time, and yes, and Michael, hello. Yeah, Michael's obviously, all of you who are in the IAJS are very familiar with Michael and his wonderful efforts to help create and maintain this society.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Michael. All right. Hi, Camille. Hi, Paul. Sina.
Well, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Talk. Thanks. Great
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
You're welcome. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, Benny.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Benny, hey, Brian.
Hi, Mary. Oh, Mary just left. Hey, Randy, I know that's you on the Zoom coordinator, I learned.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. I went and this was really good. Mark brought his books to life. I was like, wait a minute, I have this material. This is what he's been talking about.
Yeah,
I have that one too. I was like, oh, that one's downstairs. This one was up here with me.
yeah. As he was
Yeah.
talking, I was just pulling up. He was talking about the article. He talked about working with disruptions in symbolic capacity.
Yeah.
And
Oh, did you find it?
there's some references. I don't. Maybe there's some in the one you're looking at, Benny. But there's definitely some references in this one.
Okay.
And of course, you know, I've read this one already. But those are some of the areas that I kind of didn't pay as much attention to. But I'm actually working with a patient where I think this actually applies.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back and do some more review.
Yeah, me too. I'm this also lines up with, there was a class that I took from a guy named Jerome Blackman. His background is psychoanalysis, but he said that when you use short, pithy statements, that you get to affect. When you talk too much, then, or you talk more, it's getting to the intellect, which sounds very much like what Mark is talking about with metaphor. Right, pithy means you have to be short, and it's going to be, well, that's like smoke in the sky.
Right, and then leave it.
Yeah, yes, walk away.
yeah, and just leave it. So, yeah, this was really good. This was really good.
Oh, I'm glad you both could make it. I'm gonna be hey, Randy.
Hey, Randy.
That's
Well,
a
since
nice
it's
view.
just us now, I figured I might as well not be so hidden.
Yeah.
Why did you have to be hidden anyway? You didn't have to be hidden.
Well, it's not about me here. I'm just kind of trying to pull strings in the background.
Thanks for doing that. Yeah.
Power lies behind the throne.
Did BW ever say who they were, or RW? I thought that was you.
No, RW never said who he was. I put him out in the waiting room and tried to engage him there, and he just went away. And then there was a guy named Il Dico. Same thing. And then I found out that Lisa Holing sent you a registration request, Sonia, on 3/25, the other lady.
Oh, okay.
So basically,
I think
there was.
Go ahead.
There was about 32 people attending today.
It
was a good crowd.
Yeah, not bad. And we had about 50 some odd that registered. So, some didn't show up. Oh, you know what? Let me stop the recording.
Yeah, it won't capture all of this.
Yeah.